welcome back to Stray Trains. Due to popular demand, we're going to take a look at 10 unique services to depart Flinders Street Station during the weekday peak PM. There is, I guess, a part 1 to this video, which is 10 unique services to depart from Flinders Street during the peak AM, which I'll put the link to that video in the description below here. As for now, though, we're going to look at 10 unique services to depart Flinders Street during the peak PM. And on a side note, this is for the current timetable as of January 2024, so if you are watching this video maybe in a few years down the line, please note the timetable may have changed from now. Hope you enjoy the video. Have you ever been at Flinders Street Station at about 3:15 PM on a weekday and noticed that there is a Glen Waverley service on platform 4 departing at 3:18, and just 1 minute later a Glen Waverley service departing platform 2 at 3:19 PM? Well, except for the 3:18 Glen Waverley direct service, all other Glen Waverley services will run via the loop to Glen Waverley in the peak PM. This is because the 3:18 actually runs direct from Flinders Street to Richmond and then all the way to Glen Waverley. So even though these trains do depart 1 minute apart, because the 3:18 is direct, the 3:19 will go via the loop, making a bit more of a gap between the two trains once they reach Richmond. This definitely does frustrate a lot of people, as there is already a sort of this belief that Glen Waverley passengers get treated the best on the Burnley line. So it may cause some frustration for other Burnley line users, seeing a Glen Waverley service, or in fact 2 Glen Waverley services departing 1 minute apart from Flinders Street Station. Though I do think there is definitely purpose in having the direct going off platform 4, so they are released on sort of different island platforms, plus typically Burnley Group direct services in the peak PM generally do depart from platform 4. Fast forwarding about an hour's time, we have the 4:25 PM Mooroolbark service stopping all stations to Mooroolbark. This is the only service in the afternoon that will terminate at Mooroolbark station on the Frankston line. Then this service runs empty cars to the Mooroolbark sidings, before eventually a little bit later coming back out and running as an up empty carriage transfer movement to Flinders Street to run another service. Number 3, similar to the Glen Waverley direct service, is a Craigieburn direct service that will depart from Flinders Street platform 9, run straight to Southern Cross, North Melbourne, and then out to Craigieburn via the Broadmeadow suburban line. And if you do miss that, just 2 minutes later, there's a Craigieburn service departing at 4:53, stopping all stations to Craigieburn via the city loop. So once again, 2 Craigieburn services, just 2 minutes apart. And this is also rather interesting, as all other Northern Group services in the peak PM really do depart from platform 4 and 5, assuming there are no delays. So not only is this the only direct Northern Group service, but it's the only one that will, or at least is scheduled to depart outside of the typical platforms 4 and 5, which definitely might confuse some passengers, as platform 9 isn't that close to platforms 4 or 5 at Flinders Street Station. Yeah, on a side note, as we've seen here, you can also get quite a nice view of the, I guess, North Melbourne sidings and the west of the CBD. And no doubt this list will have a lot of Burnley Group services on it. Still staying at 4:53 PM, we have the 4:53 PM Belgrave service, stopping all stations to Richmond, running express from Richmond to Box Hill, Box Hill to Blackburn, Blackburn to Mitcham, Mitcham to Ringwood, then stopping all stations to Belgrave via the city loop. This Belgrave service is rather interesting because of its express, or stopping pattern I guess, running express Richmond to Box Hill, which is great, and then still even running express past stations beyond Box Hill until getting to Ringwood, and then stopping all stations to Belgrave from Ringwood. Number 5 on this list sees the 5:11 PM Macleod, stopping all stations to Macleod via the city loop. This service is interesting for 2 reasons. Number 1, it is the only service in the peak PM that will terminate at Macleod station on the Hurstbridge line, which means it is the only service that will utilise platform 3 at Macleod station during the peak PM, which does create a rather interesting view, as we can see right here. On top of that, it actually is the junction for the former Mod Park line, so it is kind of cool still to this current day running on a track that used to be a completely separate route, being the Mod Park line. So definitely a very historic run. But unfortunately, as far as you can get onto the Mont Park line is indeed Macleod Station, so that's why the train will terminate there. Just joking, of course, it can't go any further, there's no tracks. 2 minutes later, we return back to the Burnley group for the 5:13pm Mooroolbark service, stopping all stations to Richmond, running express from Richmond to Glenferrie, Glenferrie to Camberwell, Camberwell to Box Hill, then stopping all stations to Mooroolbark via the City Loop. This service is quite unique as it is the only service that runs beyond Ringwood on the Lilydale line that does not terminate at Lilydale Station. Also, it is probably one of the most confusing service names ever, just due to its pronunciation. A lot of people do have a bit of fun pronouncing it. And it is very odd as it does stop just one stop shy of the terminus of the line being Lilydale Station. And this is probably due to train congestion, as between Mooroolbark and Lilydale, it is unfortunately only a single track, meaning only one train can travel between the two stations at a time. And just 2 minutes after that, we have the 5:15pm Mernda service, stopping all stations to Jollymont, running express from Jollymont to Victoria Park, then stopping all stations to Mernda via the City Loop. There is also a 5:43pm Mernda service that does the exact same thing. These are the only two services along the entire Mernda line during the peak PM that run express through any stations, making them quite unique and definitely deserving on this list. Whilst yes, it is a very short express service, only running express through 3 stations, well, it's an express service nonetheless. It does feel like every second service is on the Burnley group in this video, and we will return back to the Burnley group for the 5:17pm and the 5:33pm Upper Ferntree Gully, stopping all stations to Richmond, running express from Richmond to Glenferrie, Glenferrie to Camberwell, Camberwell to Box Hill, then stopping all stations to Upper Ferntree Gully via the City Loop. Similar to the properties of the Mooroolbark service, the Upper Ferntree Gully services are the only two services that will terminate at a station beyond Ringwood on the Belgrave line before Belgrave being Upper Ferntree Gully, plus the typical Richmond, Glenferrie, Camberwell, Box Hill, then all stopping pattern. On maybe an irrelevant, but I guess a side note nonetheless, Upper Ferntree Gully would be the longest destination that any service has on the current metro timetable, as it is already in itself one of the longest station names. Number 9 sees the 6:35pm Belgrave service, stopping all stations to Richmond, running express from Richmond to Glenferrie, Glenferrie to Camberwell, then stopping all stations to Belgrave via the City Loop. Now this service is, in my opinion, one of the most pivotal services during the peak PM. Notice how it actually is a stop-all service between Camberwell and Box Hill, which is a bit different to the typical express pattern on the Ringwood corridor. But beyond that, this is why this service is so important. Let's just pretend now we're at Richmond Station, platforms 9 and 10, where the Burnley group trains typically depart from. Generally speaking, the stop-all services, that is your Blackburns and Ringwoods plus Alemain trains, will depart from platform 10, whereas your express services generally departs from platform 9. Let's say you've just missed the 6:24pm Ringwood service from platform 10 at Richmond Station. Your next Ringwood service is actually 6:53pm, causing a 29-minute wait for a service which is, well, really not that good. And if you do want a stop-all service between Richmond and Camberwell, you've got a 6:32 Alemain service. But that leaves those that want to travel to either East Camberwell, Canterbury, Chatham, or Union in a little bit of a dilemma, as you typically will wait for platform 10 for a stop-all service, but notice there's none for, I guess, that 29-minute wait. This is where the 6:35pm Belgrave service, or at Richmond the 6:46pm Belgrave service, comes into play. After departing Richmond, this service runs express to Glenferrie, then Camberwell, and then stops all stations to Belgrave. So this is where those passengers that want to travel for a stop-all service between Box Hill and Camberwell have the opportunity to take this train to get to their required station. Because the passenger information display only displays the next service to depart from platform 9 stopping pattern, those that do want this stop-all service between Camberwell and Box Hill don't actually know about it, as they look at platform 10, look at platform 9 and say, Oh, hang on, where's my service? So this service, whilst it probably should be advertised a little bit better and does cause a little bit confusion for those passengers, it is actually a pivotal service for the peak PM, sort of between that 6:30 to 7 PM mark. And finally, to round off this list, the 7:01 PM Ringwood service, stopping all stations to Ringwood except East Richmond. And you might be saying, well, what's unique about this service? There's plenty of them, and to that I would say, oh, yeah, that's true. But what makes this service rather unique is typically during the peak PM, there is an Alemain service departing from Flinders Street Station, so there's no need to take a train to Camberwell and change there. However, after the peak PM, you need to take either a Belgrave or Lilydale service and change at Camberwell for an Alemain service, as the last Alemain service departs Flinders Street Station at 7:13 PM. However, this Ringwood service actually connects with the first Alemain shuttle. So if you're at 7 PM at Flinders Street Station and see the next Alemain service is at 7:13 PM, you actually want to catch this Ringwood service and change at Camberwell for the first Alemain shuttle, which will originate at Camberwell for the night, which is kind of odd. So the first Alemain shuttle is actually originating before the last Alemain service originates out of Flinders Street, which is a little bit confusing, but I think kind of cool. And with that concludes the video. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed the video and learnt a thing or two about some of the more unique services we see in the peak PM. Have you ridden any of these services? I think we'll leave it at that. Cheers.